The first known circular zodiac, featuring the 12 divisions appropriated by modern astrology, appeared in the historical records in ancient Babylon and the Persian Empire, modern-day Iraq and Iran, and also Vedic India, which was one time a part of the Persian Empire, in circa 550 BC. It appears in a Greek historical record a few decades later, and in Egypt and also China on the other side of continental Eurasia in circa 200 BC. The belief in predictive omens, assuming the form of eclipses, comets, starbursts and planetary movements, however, is as old as humanity itself. One could quite reasonably argue that modern astrology is stylistically related to this more than anything else. And it is very difficult to make a case that there is a causal relationship connecting events like this with good or bad outcomes for us in our day-to-day life. At the same time, it is possible that the planets of our solar system exert some influence on our psyche, since it is undeniable that the Sun and Moon influence life on Earth and the planet itself in a number of ways. If the planets do exert an influence on the human psyche, then we cannot be certain of the nature of these influences. We can, however, be quite sure that the names we have arbitrarily chosen for the planets from a pantheon of Greek deities does not magically imbue them with the qualities of the gods themselves, even if we could stretch our imagination far enough to believe that they ever existed in the first place. The same applies to the constellations of modern astrology. It beggars belief that stars, often separated by hundreds of light years, and from our point of view, roughly depict one creature or another, causes those born under this influence to exhibit the creature's characteristic traits. While it is easy and fun to mock modern astrology, astrologers themselves, and biblical literature for that matter, we should be cautious in dismissing it altogether. Historically, some very distinguished thinkers and true Renaissance men have taken astrology quite seriously, so it is not simply the domain of urban mystics, charlatans, and the intellectually feeble. The issue here, of course, is cause and effect, and more particularly, the signifier being taken as the cause. It is quite evident that people are of different psychological types, and it is possible that dots were connected in the sky to fashion celestial signifiers of different type characteristics. The material we find when reading descriptors of our sun signs, although very often vague or applicable to most people to a greater or lesser extent, sometimes includes description of very specific traits that seem to apply to one or another star sign more than we might expect. But examples like these are few and far between, and as things stand, there is no compelling reason for us to take modern astrology seriously. In any case, from the moment the first circular zodiacs appeared in the historical record, they were conflated with the calendar year, time, particularly in Vedic astrology, and less obviously geometry. What we do not realize, however, is that the Zodiac Schematic, with all the divisions we find repeated in the New and Old Testaments, is historically much older than the 600 BC mark generally accepted. In fact, the first circular Zodiac Schematic is represented in ancient Sumer 2,000 years earlier. In terms of our written history, this is a staggering amount of time. It is equivalent to the expanse of time from pharaonic Egypt, the birth of Socrates, Plato, and afterwards Jesus, to our present moment. To the best of our knowledge, before this representation in Sumer, there is nothing but a scant retrospective myth. Before the rise of Sumer, the Mesopotamian region in modern Iraq was occupied by the Ubaidians, who lived a fairly simple agrarian lifestyle on the fertile banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. According to ancient historians, The Sagigar, meaning black-headed people, arrived in Mesopotamia from unknown lands, and they spoke an unknown language. They were almost certainly black Africans, racially and linguistically quite distinct from the Semitic and pre-Semitic peoples of the region. It is these people who were the first Sumerians, and apparently they brought with them the knowledge responsible for the so-called 100 firsts that define civilization, although we cannot really consider them firsts, as this knowledge must have come from somewhere. We just don't know where. This is, of course, not the Western world's preferred history, so it is not surprising that few people know about it, or that few textbooks, if any, write about it. Among the so-called first inventions were the 360-degree circle, geometry, abstract mathematics, the formal definitions and measures of time as we know it today, and the Zodiac Schematic, which we will consider now. The Sumerians, as we did in the beginning of our exploration into basic symbols, divided the 360-degree circle into day and night sections, and then along solstices and equinoxes. They divided the 360-degree circle into the 12 30-degree sections we still use today to measure time, the calendar, the clock face, and so on. They further divided the circle into 36 divisions known as decans. I was surprised to discover this, but there is no doubt since the Sumerians kept clay tablet diaries of their records. For instance, in the diary of the month of Nisan, from the year 5 of Amar Suen, circa 2041 BCE, we find this. The month of Nisan is divided into 3 decans. In the first decan, the Sisig fish appears. In the second decan, the Good Moo fish appears. In the third decan, a high priestess offers a sacrifice. Finally, for some time the Sumerians divided their 360-day year into 72 5-day weeks. This is all quite interesting and raises many questions. Why a 360-degree circle? Why not 420 or 600? Why 12 divisions? Why not 14 or 19? Why 36 decan divisions and not some other number? We don't have answers, only guesswork and speculation. As previously mentioned, the yearly calendar has 365 and a quarter days in it, and even then this was well known. So why try and squeeze the year into 360 degrees and then adjust it by intercalating 5 days? Then there is nothing in the astronomical world, in constellations for instance, to indicate any of these divisions. The 12 constellations used by astrology, for instance, are far from evenly spaced. Some occupy more than 30 degrees, others much less, and different cultures recognize up to and over 40 constellations in their zodiacs. There is no celestial reason for 36 decans either, though this is sometimes claimed. More interesting again is that this exact zodiac schematic appears in Chinese astrology, so we cannot claim that these divisions are legacies of Jewish invention, tradition, or superstition. In summary, the Zodiac Schematic, with all of its divisions, appeared at least 4,500 years ago, and we have no idea where it came from or why it is constructed in the manner it was. We do know that ever since it has been appropriated as a schematic to measure time, months, years, and ages, as a schematic for geometry, as a schematic in music theory to describe the intervals between notes, as an historical schematic to represent weights and measures, and as a schematic to represent the ideas of astrology, planetary and celestial influences, and things like that. But what was its principal intended purpose? We will endeavour to answer this as we work through future videos. In the meantime, it is worth our while to examine the Chinese circular zodiac schematic, which first appeared during the Han Dynasty in circa 206 BC. The Chinese zodiac is divided into 4 quadrants, which, like Western astrology, contains 3 related parts and renders a 12-part schematic. It is noteworthy that China, despite its topographical, cultural and geographical isolation from ancient Sumer, also includes the 36 pairs of decans represented in the earliest known zodiac schematic 4,500 years ago on the other side of continental Eurasia. From Wikipedia. The Chinese zodiac features decans in the form of 36 calendar animals. The group originated in China, wherein the 36 were divided into 4 clusters, with each cluster made up of 9 animal deity pairs. The 4 clusters represent the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The 4 clusters of 9 pairs of animal deities renders a final schematic of 72 divisions. The Chinese zodiac schematic is altogether precisely identical to the Sumer rendering, and those we have found in the New and Old Testaments, as well as other sources. In the West, psychological types are defined in 30-day increments, while the Chinese zodiac allocates a whole year to each animal type. But it also uses less well-known animal signs, assigned by month, called inner animals, by day, called true animals, and by hour, called secret animals. If we compare these zodiac systems from the East and West, we find they share something important in common. Besides being schematically identical, both attempt to describe psychological type, although through remarkably different methods. In the West, through the influence of constellations. In the East, by their likeness to traits exhibited by a variety of animals. It is noteworthy that the animals of the Chinese zodiac, and many other Eastern countries besides, are not associated with constellations spanned by the ecliptic plane at all, whereas modern Western astrology is. The constellation used by the West and the animals used by the East are then clearly signifiers of different psychological types, not the cause. It is useful for us to be clear about this. As we discussed previously, the difficulty with assessing systems of psychological types is that there are many reasonably valid ways we can divide people into categories of type. We find fourfold divisions in modern psychology and other systems we have already looked at. Systems of 12 types, 9 types, like Jungian, Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram of personality, certain forms of numerology, and too many more to mention. The material we have already explored in some depth, however, enables us to be quite sure that psychological type is premised on 4 initial divisions: thinking types, emotional types, moving types, and instinctive types. This is consistent with the ideas carried by the Tetragrammaton, by certain forms of numerology, by the teachings of Gurdjieff, to a large extent by the Bible, the divisions of the Tarot, and for most part by modern astrology. But what of the 12-part divisions of the zodiac schematic? What do they mean? How are we to understand them? If we could be as sure of these as we are of our 4 fundamental functional divisions, and our default psychological orientation into one of these or the other, then we would understand a great many things. In order to take these divisions seriously, they must be founded on real things, real psychological divisions that we can subjectively prove and verify beyond reasonable doubt. They would need to be verifiable from one person to another, one culture to another, irrespective of conditions of upbringing, nature, or nurture, in the same way as we can be absolutely sure that our thinking, feeling, spatial movement, and our instinctive bodies constitute all that we are and all that we can do. The descriptions of 12 psychological divisions we find in Western astrology is very far from meeting the standard. And we do not find anything whatsoever that meets this kind of standard in the entire sphere of esoteric, religious, philosophical, and psychological literature, with only one exception. Finally, any description of these divisions must bring us demonstrable, individual and collective knowledge and insight into ourselves that we were unaware of previously and which cannot be arrived at through ordinary means. It seems to me that this latter point is particularly relevant. There must be a very good reason why the Zodiac Schematic and all of its divisions have been perpetuated throughout history, cross-culturally, and throughout both testaments of the Bible and Orthodox and heterodox scripture in the literature of so-called Jewish mysticism and elsewhere. The purpose cannot be to pay homage to a calendar, to the way we divide time, to arbitrary traditions of arranging things on baseless superstitions, fortune-telling, and celestial omens. A long time ago, early in my own exploration, I came across a very useful piece of literature. It was a Bible constructed so that everything Jesus said or was attributed to him was written in red. After reading everything in red and nothing else, I had no doubt whatsoever that the nature of this teaching was not only profoundly insightful, but profoundly psychological in character. It beggars belief that he would arrange his ministry to perpetuate the Zodiac Schematic if there was nothing of importance behind it. In the following videos, we will try to unpack the division of 12 in the Zodiac Schematic in a way that enables us to meet, in the first place, subjective evidentiary standards, and satisfy ourselves that these psychological divisions of the individual are quite real and verifiable. In the meantime, I would like to highlight some of the references to the divisions of 12 in the Bible and Gnostic literature, since we will work on defining the 12 distinct psychological divisions of the individual in the next section. Once again, the first question we asked in this series of videos, and are resolving as we go along, was how are man and woman created in God's image and after his own likeness? To date, we have settled the matter of likeness of man, the world, and God in regards to 1, 2, 3, and 4 divisions. What follows is only a small fraction of examples associating these 12 divisions to God and heaven. We can start with something I neglected to mention when talking about the 12-part tree of life described in the book of Revelation in the last video. In Kabbalistic Judaism, there are 12 Sephirot, which are attributes or emanations of God. In the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, Jesus is said to have 12 powers which he imparted to his disciples. The Zohar, a key text of Jewish mysticism, speaks of the supernal light of God being reflected in 12 vessels or channels. In the Book of Enoch, a Jewish text from the Second Temple period, there are 12 archangels who stand before God. The prophet Ezekiel has a vision of the heavenly city with 12 gates, each named after one of the 12 tribes of Israel. In the Old Testament, there are 12 stones that he used to build an altar to God in the book of Exodus. In the book of Revelation, the New Jerusalem is described as having 12 foundations, which are adorned with 12 precious stones and 12 gates, each made from a single pearl. The Zohar, a key text of Jewish mysticism, speaks of 12 permutations of God's name, which represent the 12 qualities or attributes of God. In the Gospel of Thomas, the Gnostic text, Jesus speaks of 12 disciples as his friends and says they will sit on the 12 thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel. The Gnostic Gospel of Philip speaks of 12 angels who guard the gates of the heavenly realm, and says that these angels are called the perfect, for they are the first creation. In the Gnostic Gospel of Mary, Jesus speaks of the 12 powers of the soul, which must be awakened in order to attain salvation. Thanks for listening.